Everyone, welcome back to Yuri's Box. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the FED Beige Book for the month of April. If you like this kind of content, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. And as usual, nothing in this video is financial advice. So, again, if you've been following the channel, I usually talk a lot about, TLT, bonds, and the way I am interpreting, the current state of the economic data, which is usually pretty boring stuff on its own. And, I thought that it would be a great idea to make things less boring by going through the Beige Book for the month of April. All jokes aside, I do believe that it does offer a window into the state of the economy. And while you should never go full macro, always remember that, it is always worthwhile, in my opinion, to consider the things that are being said and really that are being outlined in the FED Beige Book. So without any further ado, in case you don't know what the FED Beige Book is, so what it basically is a publication, as it says right here, that comes out every 2 weeks before the FOMC meeting. And so eight times a year, okay? And it basically breaks down the economy. And the way you should visualize it is by these regions here. So you have, San Francisco, New York, St. Louis, Minneapolis, Kansas, San Francisco, again, Cleveland, Philadelphia. And each branch of the Federal Reserve offers its own perspective into the U.S. economy. And so really, as a summary, economic activity overall was basically unchanged. And this is something that you'll see throughout the video. The main theme that is really pervasive in the Beige Book is really tariff worries and basically activity being flat overall. And again, this you can see it right here. Just 5 districts saw slight growth. 3 districts noted activity was unchanged, and the remaining 4 districts reported slight to modest declines. So even on the starting point isn't that great, meaning this isn't a description of an economy that is red hot. Okay, this isn't an economy that is, at 2022 levels or 2023 levels. We're starting to get on the wobbly side. All right. And if you add to that tariffs, that is quite fuel to the fire. And as you see right here, most districts saw moderate, robust sales of vehicles, generally attributed to a rush to purchase ahead of tariff-related price increases. And this is one of the reasons why when the retail sales numbers came out last week, if I'm not mistaken, there was a lot of emphasis on the non-auto spending, because overall there is this feeling that a lot of the demand that we're seeing currently right now is potentially skewed by the fact that people are afraid of price increases. So, hey, if I was planning to buy a car this year, I might as well do it now, because mainly the price might go up. All right. This is something else that will come up later in the video. Cuts to federal grants and subsidies, along with declines in philanthropic donations, caused gaps in services provided by community organizations. And the outlook in several districts worsens considerably as economic uncertainty rose. The first part is quite noteworthy, and it comes right here in blue. The most notable declines in headcount were in government roles or roles at organizations receiving government funding. And again, this falls under the umbrella of the fiscal tightening, all right? I'm always a bit tentative when I say fiscal tightening, because it is hard to say that we're running a fiscally tight budget when still to this day the US's deficit is at still record highs. And again, the US is still spending money hand over fist. So it's not like we're, I don't know, austerity in Greece in in 2012 or 2013. We're far away from that, definitely. But again, at least on the fringe, on the margin, you do start to see this. And again, this will come out later on in the report. You start to get this kind of vibe shift. All right, if you want to be talk like us young people. Moving on, where are we? Okay. Wages generally grew at a modest pace, and wage growth slowed from previous reports in multiple districts. And again, this is something that we'll keep this in mind, because this will be a common theme. Prices increased across districts, with 6 characterizing price growth as modest and 6 characterizing as moderate, similar to previous reports. Most districts noted that firms expected elevated import cost growth resulting from tariffs. However, there were reports about margin compression amid increased costs, as demand remained tepid in some sectors. And this really plays into something that I've been highlighting in my videos. The fact that given the state of the economy, and we saw this perhaps not today in today's PMI report, but in previous reports, you get the feeling that yes, it is the intention of companies to potentially pass on the costs to customers, but it is becoming clearer as time goes by that is possibly easier said than done. Given the fact, for example, and I'll keep this in mind because this will be quite a recurring theme throughout the video. I go back to the trustee quits rate. All right. The only way people are willing to absorb increase in costs, is if their wages are allowing them to stomach new increased costs. And the only way you see that is really when the quits rate is on the uptrend. And again, just to set the theme for the entire video, the way you should treat the quits rate, in my opinion, is that the quits rate is a survey. It is what the University of Michigan survey wishes it would be, wishes it could be. Because basically, what you get in the quits rate is a survey of people's actions rather than people's words. Because the problem with the University of Michigan, and this isn't an original thought by any stretch of the imagination, the problem with that survey there is that whenever you ask people for their opinion, that opinion can be easily skewed by political leaning. So if you're a Republican and there's Biden in the House, yeah, the economy might be great, but you have your own personal incentive to kind of paint things that are potentially worse than they are. Just as we've seen the things flip with Trump going into the White House in November. You see it with, there's a clear bifurcation between Democrats and Republicans. The minute Trump gets in, Democrats are expecting Weimar Germany levels of inflation. And the minute Trump gets in, Republicans are expecting, the merry old land of Oz. So you get a lot of noise in those surveys, all right? Mainly from political biases. And that is particularly true with, today's political environment where, everyone's, a Taliban with their own opinions, but that's just the nature of it. And again, the reason why I like the quits rate and I treat it as a survey is because people are telling you what they think of the economy via their actions. Meaning, if the quits rate is at cycle highs, or as it is at on the uptrend at the very least, labor market participants are telling you that the economy is great, right? The fact that people are quitting their job on a voluntary basis simply means that they see abundance in the economy. They see lots of job openings, and the fact that they have the possibility to switch job gives them leverage in the labor market. Because even if they don't change job, they can always use the fact that they have the potential, the possibility to switch jobs, to go to their current employer and say, "Hey, bucko, I want a 6% increase on my paycheck." Why? Because otherwise I'm going to switch. And that is possible when the quits rate is high. I mean, that is a consequence, all right? People are telling you that they see the abundance in the economy, and they're fairly comfortable with having a more aggressive approach in the labor market. The opposite is true when we are at cycle lows in the quits rate. People are they're no longer seeing rather the abundance that they saw back in 2021 and the first months of 2022. Even right here, when at the end of 2022, when the quits rate was still relatively high, meaning that wage growth will likely stay sluggish. I mean, you'll definitely won't be seeing the rapid increases in wages that you saw in the lead up to the inflationary 2021 and 2022 years, and that will weigh on consumption. And the problem with that is that because you don't have a way to pump your wages, basically, any bout in inflation will eat into your personal margin, or really eat into your in how much you can spend. All right, because let's say that a basic example, you have to buy a car, right, and you have, let's say, $10,000 left over for down payment as a budget. All right, before tariffs, down payment was $5,000. So before tariffs, you just put the down payment down, and it's $5,000. And after that, you have $5,000 left to spend in whatever you want. Restaurants, cinemas, strip clubs, whatever. Go have a great time. Enjoy yourself. Tariffs roll around, right? And all of a sudden, instead of having to put down 5,000, let's say you have to put down 7,500, right? Now you have 2,500, 2,500 left over to spend in restaurants and whatever services you deem fit. So it's actually, you're spending more money on the same amount of goods, and you have less left over to spend on everything else. All right. So again, that is the way I'm interpreting inflation from here on out. Meaning, inflation will likely just be a burden both on businesses and individuals. Going back to the Beige Book. Again, this is what you see right here. There were reports of margin compressions. This is again on the business side. Same analogy, all right? You're a business, you have increased costs, but your revenue is staying flat because you can't really pass on those costs to the customer because the customer isn't really going to stomach that increased costs. So you have revenues staying flat and costs going up. Well, that's not good news, all right? That margin is your lifeline. That is what is keeping you in business. If that's all of a sudden starts to get squeezed, the only weapon really you have as a business to defend your business against squeezing of margins is to eventually lay off people. All right. or at the very least, not hire any, not increase the workforce, the labor force in your business. All right. And again, this offers a brief summary, really, all the highlights that you'll see later on. And I think we can actually skip ahead here. We can actually move on to the first branch, to the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. And something you'll see here, so in purple is I've highlighted actually good news, all right? But even when we see good news, there's for every piece of good news, let's put it like this, there is a piece of bad news associated with it. Even when there's good news in this report, really, there isn't any just it's pure good news, right? This isn't a red hot economy, again, as I said at the beginning of the video. Just going through it again, let's just read the report. Economic activity increased slightly, about as the same as the previous report. Good. Employment edged up, but many firms plan to pause or limit hiring going forward because of policy uncertainty. The outlook became considerably more uncertain and more pessimistic, as contexts emphasize risks of rising inflation and weakening demand linked to tariffs and other federal policies. Again, focusing on the labor market, employment increased slightly. Concerning the outlook, a few firms expected to engage in moderate hiring activity in the coming months, but most plan to limit or even pause hiring because of elevated uncertainty and or weak demand. No significant layoffs were planned. And I think it's worthwhile to focus on this last bit of information right here. Because another kind of false myth, if you will, that is you often hear it, is that the economy is strong because things like initial jobless claims are low, meaning that people aren't filing for unemployment, and therefore people aren't getting laid off, and so hooray, the economy is strong. Well, first of all, I want to address something that I maybe I addressed in my previous videos, but I'll do it now, just to be just to be safe. If you follow MacroEdge, Danielle DiMartino Booth, or basically mainly these two profiles on X, they talk extensively about how there is a problem with initial jobless claims. And the fact is that many states offer very little compensation for unemployment claims. And if the choice is between, for example, going for a $300 check per week on unemployment benefits, or driving for DoorDash or Uber, which let's say pays $600 or $700 per week, what are you more likely to do? Go for the unemployment or go for Uber? All right. So there is an argument to be made that the kind of gig economy has acted as a shock absorber, potentially limiting the potential moves in the initial jobless claims. But I will also just point out that the fact that compensation is low for unemployment claims does definitely have I see the merit in that argument. But just now that I've pointed those two things out, let's ignore them and let's just take initial jobless claims at face value. And again, going back to, just for reference, no significant layoffs were planned. All right. Concerning the outlook, moderate hiring, or most firms plan to limit or pause hiring. Okay. Again, what you often hear in the media is that many people talk about jobless claims in this fashion, is that the economy is strong because initial jobless claims are low. That even at a historical level, is incorrect, in my opinion. And you don't really have to look that far, okay? I've been looking at 2008 and the 2006 and 2008 comparison with this cycle right here. And just looking at initial jobless claims and the behavior that you see in initial jobless claims, by the time you see initial jobless claims spike and actually break out, okay, it's already over. It's already game over. Meaning, if you're waiting, let's say you're the Fed and you're waiting for initial jobless claims to explode higher in order to, say, cut rates, I've often used the analogy that it is like, saying, I'm not going to shower until I smell like rotten eggs, because then I'll know I have to shower. Yeah, but the point is to shower so you don't smell like rotten eggs, so you don't get to that point. Because again, the last thing to move is initial jobless claims and layoffs. And a better way of visualizing this as well is just looking at, layoffs and discharges, the data. Okay. Here we are. Now it's finally cooperating. So this right here is when layoffs peaked. And what do you notice? April of 2009 is exactly the month when the recession was ended, all right? It's called to be ended by the NBER. Okay? The recession, according to the NBER, began in December of 2007. Look where layoffs were in December of 2007. If you're using layoffs as, the thermometer for the economy, you are just asking to be late. All right, you're potentially putting, the blindfolds on, and you're saying everything's great, everything's fine, we don't have to worry about anything. All right. And I could definitely be wrong. I've been arguing that potentially we'll look back in this time frame right here when the Fed is complacent, and again they might be right, but I'm arguing that they should be cutting, and they should have continued cutting, even though it might have seemed as a mistake. All right, simply because the problem really resides in these three phrases right here. Okay. Concerning the outlook, a few firms expected to engage in moderate hiring activity, but most plan to limit or even pause hiring. The symptom of I don't want to say recessionary, I don't want to say depression, because it's not true. The symptom of a slowing economy isn't layoffs. The symptom of a slowing economy is hiring rates. Now, the hiring rate. How many are businesses hiring or not? And again, I wish we this chart would go back in time, but this is the window of opportunity that an economy offers to potential outside shocks. Meaning that whenever you see an environment where yes, layoffs are low, but the hiring rate is low, meaning it is plateaued, it is flat, that is when the economy is primed for a shock. Meaning that if everything stays the same, then yes, the economy will most likely continue to chug along. But it's like Mr. Burns on The Simpsons, when he goes on the for a checkup, and he says, he has all of these diseases at the same time, and he says, I'm invincible, and the doctor says, no, but actually a slight breeze could just call it quits for you. It's potentially not as dramatic as that, but you get the picture. A weak economy isn't made up by layoffs. Layoffs are the last domino to fall. A weak economy is an environment where you have the hiring rate, which is cooling off, leveling off. And if you fast forward today, that is exactly what we have. The hiring rate is basically back at 2015 levels. Right, we are well away from the levels that we saw from in 2022, and arguably and partially in 2023. All right, we were still at, pre-COVID levels right here, still in June of 2023. Okay, but again, I think it's worthwhile to put the emphasis on this because I hear it a lot. The economy is fine. Why should the Fed cut if initial jobless claims are at historic lows? Well, historically, layoffs are the last thing to come around. And by the time they come around, the mess is usually over. All right? You're usually, clean up on aisle 3 at that point. You're thinking about the cleanup at that point by the time initial jobless claims spike and layoffs spike. All right? This is what you should be worried about, in my opinion. The fact that we don't have any hiring, that the hiring has peaked out, and we are basically, again, at 2015 levels. All right? Going back to the report. On the prices side, the Federal Reserve of Boston. Prices rolled modestly on average, but contacts said that prices could start to rise more rapidly in coming months. Can fast forward here into the specific sectors and move on to the Federal Reserve of New York. Again, employment in the region was steady to up slightly and wages grew modestly. However, economic activity in the second district contracted modestly and outlooks darkened, with many businesses anticipating declining activity and rising prices in the months ahead. Again, looking at the labor market, on balance, employment in the region was steady to slightly up. However, demand for workers held steady, though some employers reported pausing hiring amid heightened uncertainty. And again, it goes back to what I just finished saying. You're not getting, if you're looking at the Beige Book for the fact that we're having layoffs and it's a depression, you're not going to find that. What you'll find is the makings of a slowing economy. All right, and what makes a slowing economy? Precisely the environment in which we are now, I believe. Meaning, yes, low layoffs, but low hiring. All right. Looking at prices, on the prices side, both selling price and import price increases picked up to the higher end of the moderate range. Right, that's a fancy way that prices are going up. Firms dependent on import expressed concerns about compressed margins and their ability to pass on costs increases to consumers. Again, it goes back to what I was saying before. Whether tariffs will be inflationary or not. Again, not to be too pedantic, but going back to the quits rate. Inflation can be inflationary. I mean, this is going to sound ridiculous, and I'm probably not even phrasing it in the best way possible. I'm just to set the record straight. But inflation can actually be deflationary, all right? And the best example that I can give you is, say, the oil shock that we saw with the invasion of Ukraine, all right? My basic argument with what I just said is that because the economy was hot, as suggested by the quits rate, right? Because you saw people basically quit the job increasingly because they saw the fact that the economy was growing and booming, and labor markets were just fine, meaning they could switch jobs, ask for more money, everything was great. This shock right here, which in today's environment could easily derail the economy, in my opinion, was actually absorbed by the economy and was actually probably one of the things that led to the high inflation. All right. My speculation is that if we were to see $120 on oil today, it would actually lead to the exact opposite conclusion. All right. Meaning we would see growth just plummet. Because again, we are not in a position, as suggested by the quits rate, as everything we've been reading in the PMI reports and so on and so forth, to be able to absorb a shock. Because again, we are in a low hiring environment. The economy is close to peaking. We might not be there yet, but that is basically what I'm suggesting here. And therefore, any shock, any inflationary bout will likely lead to margin compression on the business side, and on the consumer side, either just have leading consumers to spend more money on the same amount of goods, and so you have less money going around to spend on other services and things like that, and or consumers just quitting altogether. All right, that is how I'm going about this. Okay, moving on. We can actually fast forward over to Philadelphia. And again, business activity in the third district declined modestly after falling slightly in the prior period. Auto dealers reported a strong increase in car sales, thanks to a pulling forward of demand to beat tariff-related price increases. And again, this theme is really something that I've speculated on as well in regards to inflation. Okay. When talking about inflation, I made the parallel in the previous months to 2023. So the idea is from the fall to January to March, you smack in the middle, you have the holiday season. And during the holiday season, you have people spending more, traveling more, eating more, giving gifts. People get their end of year bonuses. And so that is a tailwind for inflation. People consume more, so you could easily expect the inflation to stay sticky. However, when you get on the other side of that, when you get out of that, that time frame, the previous trend continues. And that's what we saw last summer. Now, I started making videos right here. All right. Now, not to pat myself too much on the back, because again, we are seeing some inflationary pressures, and I've addressed this previously, and so we could easily see inflation go back up. But again, that's not the point of what I was just saying now. I made the parallel between this year and last year and 2023, meaning that as well as having, basically this effect right here, this bump between, the fall and January to March, because of the holiday season mainly, from September till January, you had a lot of things help keep the economy afloat, potentially, or make it look better than it probably was, and inflation look worse than it probably was. Meaning you had, in September, port strike fears. Then in October, you had natural disasters. In November, starting in November, you had tariff front running, okay? And in January, you had more natural disasters. But focusing a minute on tariff front running, because I think this is another key point right here, given also recent developments. Tariff front running probably made demand look better, growth look better, and inflation look worse. And potentially we're still seeing hints of that as the economic activity for the branch of Philadelphia is hinting towards. But overall, again, this is expected. If you know that tariffs are going to increase the price of a car, and you're already planning to buy a car, so why not just get it over with, buy it now, and avoid a possible price increase? But I'll give you this other interpretation. If the possibility of tariffs has led consumers to front run and so pull forward demand, what will the possibility or the possibility of lower tariffs, or possibly tariffs going to zero, in 6 months due to demand. Ironically, you could also see an environment where people just pull back. A, because either they already spent what they had to spend, but two, because why should I spend now when there are tariffs? Because again, we're still dealing with 10% tariffs and the possibility of prices rising. Why wouldn't I wait it out? I'll wait it out. I'll wait for the trade deals to get sorted out, and then I'll spend whatever I have to spend. That is something else you also have to consider, given the fact that we're starting to move away from this maximalist approach, and potentially having at least some kind of constructive talk going forward from here on out. But again, I think Trump, as I'm recording, was probably spoken to the media already. God knows what he said. He could have easily said the opposite. So we'll address that in another video. Moving on, employment declined slightly with demand for workers below year-ago levels. Firms continue to note that changes in trade policies pose upside risks to general inflation. Firms expect modest decline in business activity over the next 6 months. Employment appeared to decline slightly following a slight increase in the prior period. So again, this continues to feed into the idea that we are far away from a strong economy as well. Here, this really should be a highlighter. I forgot to highlight it. There continue to be reports of fewer hours, hiring freezes, and layoffs. I would put more emphasis on the fewer hours and hiring freezes, because again, that's what goes into the lead up. Right, the first clues that the economy is not doing too great is potentially the fact that you have average weekly hours. I always get mixed up. Right here. Firms generally don't move to laying off people straight away. The first thing they do is they cut your hours, okay? And this is something that we've actually seen in the, let's say if I still have it open. Yes, in the manufacturing business outlook for the Philadelphia Fed, where the average work week just took a tumble and went down to 8.7. And again, I addressed this when talking about the the report itself, and again, just pointing out the fact that we might see potentially again a dip in the work week and Friday's report in a week's time. Okay. And again, going back to the report, to the Beige Book, fewer hours again, and potential hiring freezes. Again, a low hiring environment, right? That isn't a symptom of a red-hot, roaring economy or strong and resilient, as the keywords are. All right. On the prices side, one contact reported canceling upcoming price increases, fearing a drop in consumer demand and customer demand. Meanwhile, another contact reported that a significant number of restaurants chose not to participate in an annual local restaurant week promotion because they couldn't afford to discount their menu items. Again, I go back to the idea of inflation being somehow deflationary. If it becomes unfeasible, because you can't really face the music in regards to higher prices, you're just going to quit altogether. This is true for businesses and consumers. All right. We can fast forward onto the Cleveland Fed. On balance, contact reports were consistent with flat business activity, suggesting a weaker than usual spring. Some auto dealers on the inflation side reported increased sales as customers sought to purchase cars ahead of potential tariffs. Again, what is one thing that potentially made the economy look a little bit stronger than it maybe was? The fact that we had tariff front running. All right. Now, it is true that it is still April, and this is, potentially you've seen most of it. But again, just to drive the point home, what we saw right here was potentially, and I guess this is my personal speculation, I could easily be wrong about this, but my personal speculation is that this was quote unquote artificially strong, meaning that you had a set of transitory events which, on their own helped the economy look a bit better than it otherwise would have, and inflation look worse than it really was. Okay. And, tariff front running was one of those things. Again, I would watch for the reversal of that actually in quite an ironic turn of events where, given the fact that now we're moving away from the maximalist approach, you might actually have the incentive to wait it out, because if you know that now prices are high because of, all of these price increases and tariffs, well, again, why not wait it out? Wait until this tariff drama gets sorted out and wait for lower prices. It's ridiculous, but maybe if you think about it, not so much. Again, on balance, employment levels increased slightly. They generally increased in recent weeks according to contact reports. So again, I didn't really highlight everything, but again, just going through it again. By contrast, several contacts reported that softer demand caused them to reduce headcounts, while others put hiring efforts on pause because of uncertain market outlook. Again, I would put more emphasis on the hiring efforts being put on pause rather than the layoffs, because again, historically, layoffs come at the end. By the time people are getting laid off, again, from an investment point of view, that's when you usually want to buy the dip. All right, that's when you usually want to, bring out the cannons, as they say, because that's usually the end of the recession. That is usually the end of the contraction. By the time layoffs come around, it's all over. It's, time for the cleanup on aisle one. Moving on to Richmond. Richmond saw mild growth. Employment on net was unchanged. And this is really the first example of fiscal tightening. All right. However, many federal government workers were laid off or put on administrative leave in recent weeks. In addition, federal contractors have laid off workers in response to spending cuts. For example, a research organization headquartered outside the DC region laid off workers due to contracts being cancelled. And again, we didn't really have, a chance to talk about, the Doge side of the equation, because again, I've mostly been cautious on it. But again, whenever I spoke about it, I'll just say what I said, before the tariff drama. The way you should think about Doge and people getting laid off at the government level, first of all, it is a wage less that is circulating in the economy. All right, but most importantly, try not to think about it in terms of initial jobless claims going up, meaning, you're going to see initial jobless claims spike up because these masses of government workers are getting laid off, and so we're going to have a spike in layoffs. That is definitely a possibility and, the most direct consequence, but I would like to point the attention to another thing. And it is exactly what I just read, okay? Federal contractors, right? people that are connected to the federal employees, think of, again, I think how they put it, research organizations, whatever, consulting firms, whoever, as federal layoffs proceed. I think Anna Wong, that works for the head of U.S. economics, if I'm not mistaken, for Bloomberg, actually had a report a few months ago now, when Doge was still relevant and making news, that for every government employee, you basically have two contractors that get laid off. So if you 2 or 3 contractors that get laid off. So if you have 300K federal employees that get laid off, that's 600 private jobs that get lost. All right, that's really the scope of really what is being done at the the federal layoff level. Okay, and so that's what I think you should consider. Moving on to prices. Price growth edged slightly higher in recent weeks, but on a year-over-year basis, growth remained moderate. Several businesses said that until they had a better idea of how tariffs might impact them, they were minimizing new investments and planning for various cost scenarios. Again, this is another possibly unwanted side effect of tariffs, or tariff uncertainty, rather. If I don't know what the economic environment is or will be, even worse, how inclined am I to make major investment decisions? Not really. If I'm risking millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars, I'd rather not risk them. All right, I'd rather wait and sit on my hands for a bit and wait until the guys in DC get their chickens in order. And again, if enough people do it, that just raises that is another recessionary impulse in the economy. Simple as that. And again, this is I want to make a disclaimer. Probably should have made it at the beginning. Again, I tend to have a bearish view on the economy as things stand, but again, can you blame me? All right. I mean, just going through this isn't exactly, rainbows and puppies and sunshine. Again, I personally do have a bearish bias as things stand. It's important that you know that, you the viewer. But again, I'm just trying to put 2 and 2 together. All right. And whenever I see, a low hiring environment, meaning a slowing economy, and prices going up, I just see revenues staying flat, costs going up, margins getting squeezed, and eventually, it'll lead to not great things. If we were on the other hand, something like 2022, and that is where I recognize my mistake. All right. My mistake was thinking that we were going to have a recession in 2023. Now, I've said that many of my previous videos, and just not to get too sidetracked, but if you go just look at, this is the 30-year bond, right? The reason why you had this kind of flat, this sideways action in the 30-year bond was actually because the all-knowing bond market, the smart money, as they call it, at this point was saying, yeah, you know what? You hiked rates too much. And because of that, you're going to have to cut rates a lot more. Why? Because we're going to be in a recession. But that wasn't true. And in fact, as 2023 rolled around, I remember I was actually watching the Bloomberg surveillance, and I think it was May or June, and the non-farm payrolls numbers got reported. It was, something massive, like, 400K, 500K, 600K. I don't really remember now. And I remember just lying down on the bed, and I was like, wasn't this supposed to be a recession? Where's the recession, man? And, at that point, it was like, I started to realize something was off, to say the least. So, and again, bonds just had to play catch up. And again, this is just to point out the fact that whenever you hear the fact that, bond market being touted as the smart money, I just want to remind everyone that so far, everything the bond market has said, the opposite occurred. All right. It's kind of been King Midas, King Midas's evil brother, all right, turning not to gold, but something worse. Going back to the Beige Book, moving on to Atlanta, 6th district grew slightly, but labor markets were a little unchanged, but some firms noted plans of slight reductions in headcount amid softening demand or rising cost pressures. Again, this is something that continues to play into the theme that I've been highlighting for quite some time now. Meaning that any bout of inflation, given the current state of the economy that isn't on the uptrend, as it was in 2022, will most likely lead to disinflation. Again, it is a weird, and again, I'm probably guilty of not probably phrasing it in the best way, but if you don't have a way of increasing revenue and you have costs going up, that is deflationary, right? Or disinflationary at the very least. Employment was little changed from the previous report. However, a small but increasing share of contacts noted plans for slight reduction in force as a result of softening demand or mounting cost pressures. Most contacts expected 2025 wage increases to be similar to those seen in 2024. However, some pointed to the rising cost of living as putting upward pressure on wages, but the bargaining power continued to shift from employees to employers. You're pulling in my leg now. The quits rate. When the quits rate is at cycle highs, that is an employee's labor market, meaning that the fact that there are many jobs available gives the leverage to the employee, meaning that you can either choose to stay your current job and use that as leverage, so ask for a pay increase, or switch job altogether and get a pay increase, get a high salary. And this is an employee's labor market. A labor market when the employee has leverage over the employer. I think this was called actually the Great Resignation, if I'm not mistaken. This period in time right here. The opposite is true when the quits rate is at cycle lows. Employees no longer are quitting their job because they don't see the abundance in the economy that they saw back here, meaning they no longer have the leverage in the labor market. As a consequence, it is no longer an employee's labor market, it's an employer's labor market, meaning that the employer the employee doesn't have as much bargaining power for initial salaries, for pay increases, and yada, 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 Moving on to prices. Prices and non-labor costs can increase modestly. Price increases, both realized and expected, were largely attributed to the direct and indirect impacts of trade policy. Again, tariff policy at its best. And again, just to clear everything up, personally, I'm not a big fan of tariffs. Again, I'm for free trade. China is definitely another subject, okay? Because what China does is basically predatory exports, right? It just screws over, other countries' industries, just to put it bluntly. All right, that is basically what they do, and it makes it impossible to compete with them. Now, that's not to say they don't have fine products. I mean, sure, but it is definitely not a level playing field. And just wanted to put that out there. Most contacts expect to pass through the cost of tariffs, even if it means a drop in sales. However, some consumer-facing firms noted increased price sensitivity among consumers has led them to be strategic with targeted pricing. That's kind of a cliffhanger there. And again, this goes back to what I was saying before. Okay? If consumers don't have a way of juicing their wages. Because it is an employer's labor market, they are going to be more unwilling to stomach price increases, meaning that, that price increase is probably going to stay on the balance sheet of basically companies. All right. Moving on to Chicago, economic activity little unchanged. It's a little change. So again, you're probably getting a theme here. All right. Even when there is an absence of bad news, meaning in this case it's not good news, it's just the absence of bad news, you still go back to bad news. I mean, many contacts noted a heightened uncertainty in their outlooks due to uncertainty over the direction of federal trade policy. Even though, again, employment was up slightly, as was reiterated right here. Again, Chicago is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the most bullish regions of the U.S. economy. However, again, it isn't painting a picture where, we're off to the moon, we're all, it's not 2022 or 2021 by any stretch of the imagination, okay? Fast forward to St. Louis. Again, even here, economic activity remained unchanged since the previous report. Employment levels remained unchanged. Again, while there were been few reports of layoffs, several contacts indicated the possibility of reducing headcount in the future. So, potential for layoffs in the future. And again, small businesses that have expressed confusion about changes in the state's sick leave policies. Again, this is things that have to do with the state level policies. And again, price pressures still persistent. Moving on to Minneapolis, economic activity edged lower across most sectors since the last report. Employment decreased and labor demand continued to trend down. Wage pressure growth grew modestly while prices moved moderately upward. And again, this is what I was saying before, put in a very elegant and formal phrasing. You have wages going up, but prices going up even more. And so that is, consumers not having the tools to keep up with those price increases, meaning they are more likely to quit. Say, you know what, I'm not going to spend. Hence, disinflationary inflation. All right. Employment was down slightly since the last report, and labor demand cooled notably. One workforce contact noted that employers appear to have gained more leverage in wage negotiations. Again, the almighty quits rate has spoken again. Okay? This is an employer's labor market. You don't have the abundance in the economy, so you saw right here. Therefore, people don't have bargaining power in when it comes down to wage negotiations. And again, prices up. That is a constant of this Beige Book. Moving on to Kansas City. Economic activity grew slightly. Hooray, comma. However, expectation about business activity and consumer spending weakened. Businesses' commentary about economic conditions shifted rapidly in recent weeks as uncertainty rose quickly, concerns about tariffs weighed on decision-making, and businesses sought to adapt their plans. Employment remained steady. However, job growth was subdued as hiring freezes reportedly became a more common occurrence. And again, this is playing into the fact, again, that usually layoffs are the last thing to drop. If you're waiting for layoffs, to say that we're in a weak economy, you're really late. At that point, we're, again, focusing on the cleanup. Prices up. Again, expectations of price growth over the next 6 months generally moved up. Okay. And moving on to Dallas, actually the second last district, economy again slowed. However, economic activity slowed. However, you did see employment and wages grow to a certain degree. Employment rose modestly again. Several contexts noted a wait-and-see posture on hiring amid policy uncertainty, while some firms, including airlines, cited layoffs. All right. Again, I wouldn't be worried about layoffs just yet. Again, I'm more worried about the fact that we are in this low hiring environment, and we've been in this low hiring environment for quite some time, actually. We have been, currently we are at, 2015 levels right here. Okay. But we've been at, in this kind of environment really ever since, 2023 in November, right? Even worse. Well, now that I think about it, you cannot actually say May of 2024 is actually when things, took a nosedive, really. But however, we have been in this environment for quite some time. That is basically the punchline. And again, just moving on quickly to San Francisco. Economic activity slowed slightly during the month, during the mid-February through March reporting period. Employment levels fell somewhat, and employers across industries and geographies reported recent and planned layoffs. Employment levels fell slightly in recent weeks, and the labor market outlook generally deteriorated. Context described the current labor market to be generally favorable to employers. Again, take it with the quiz rate, not with me. I'm just the messenger. With fewer opportunities for prospective employees to negotiate starting pay. That is basically, again, copy and paste the quits rate. Overall prices on the inflation side rose modestly in recent weeks at a slightly faster pace than in the previous report. Most contacts reported that they plan to pass increased input costs onto customers, but some expect to absorb cost increases to preserve market share. Again, just continuing to feed into the idea that, we'd like to pass on the increased costs as we did in 2022 and raise revenue or increase revenue. But we're not going to be able to do that, most likely, right? We will try. We'll definitely try because we don't want to lay off people. Because again, you have to also consider that companies are still quite burned from what they had to live through right here. This was a time where it was really hard to hire. There was really a shortage in the labor force. And so you still see some labor hoarding potentially, meaning that people don't want to, they just don't want to go back to a time where they were looking for people and couldn't hire people and had to actually, push wages up, to entice people to join the labor force. So you also have to consider that. I think this was the last district. Yes, we're at the end. We're at the end of the line. So again, I think it was useful to a certain extent. Hopefully, you had a cup of coffee with you, or tea, or something, or whiskey, if the market's getting to you during this hour, and how many minutes I've gone on for. But it really, again, it paints a picture that is consistent with everything that I've been going over, and really we've been going over in these videos so far. It isn't a strong and resilient economy, and it isn't a depression. It isn't a recession just yet. We are in a slowdown, and recent events have exacerbated the slowdown. And given current events, I think it and again, especially if you consider the way we came into the year, meaning in January of 2025, growth was a given. So everybody was optimistic on growth and pessimistic on inflation. Remember, inflation in January was 3%. It was hot, all right? It was still in the uptrend. So everybody was pessimistic about inflation and optimistic about growth. I remember making my first video right here. Well, my basic thesis was you should probably be bullish on bonds. And again, it's been a policy has been, making it hard to be bullish on bonds. I'll give you that. But again, my thesis back then, and it still holds, again, as long as the price action allows me to hold that view, that it would probably pay to be bullish bonds, just as everybody was pessimistic on bonds and everybody hates bonds, given the fact that everybody has been burned by bonds in the 2022 environment, because again, nothing worked in 2022, right? Bonds were at zero coupons, so the only direction they could go in was up. So you had inflation and rates had to go up, and so stocks went down, bonds went down, and everybody hates bonds now. And again, just going back to what I was saying before, my thesis back here was be bullish bonds because most likely consensus has it wrong, meaning that we are too optimistic on growth and too pessimistic on inflation. April has been a bit of a milkshake, a bit of a blender. It's been all over the place. Honestly, it feels like 3 months being condensed in a month. It's been rough. It's been hard to keep up with everything. But again, my general expectation after the electronic walk back, the tariffs, is that basically tariffs are no longer worthy of headlines, in my opinion. And as we progress throughout the year, I'm speculating that we will most likely we'll be forced to go back and consider the fundamentals of the economy and really assess how strong and how resilient the economy really is. My speculation is that it probably isn't as strong and resilient as consensus would have us believe. I hope that was a productive hour for you, and if you like this kind of content, consider leaving a like, and I'll see you next time. Bye.